Now, depending on how the fight goes, I would say that in the end, with both Godzilla and the Kraken being sort of water kaiju, although Godzilla is an amphibious kaiju because he lives on both land and in water. But yeah. Anyways, with Godzilla being an amphibious kaiju, he would have the advantage on land. Now we can even say that Godzilla has even grown slightly bigger. Now, the fight between these two would be sort of legendary. Because the Kraken and Godzilla are sort of equal in underwater, with the Kraken being only slightly faster in the water. The Kraken is not as strong as Godzilla, and thus Godzilla will pose a real threat to the Kraken. The Kraken would actually struggle here, because in the Skull Island series, he actually proposed a real threat to Kong. Because Kong needed oxygen. He needed to breathe. And he was not well adapted to fight in water. He's more adapted to fight on land. But here, the Kraken is up against an opponent that is good at fighting both in water and on land, which means that the Kraken is screwed. Now, what Godzilla will probably use as a atomic breath? No, let's just say that on Skull Island, he rarely uses his atomic breath. Rarely uses it. And would he use it in this fight? I would say no. The reason why is because I don't see the fact that he really needs to use his atomic breath. Besides, all he has to do is simply grab the Kraken by his tail and simply drag him out of the water. The Kraken would struggle a bit and try to attack Godzilla, but thanks to Godzilla's durability and his regeneration powers, that causes a problem for the Kraken. Eventually, Godzilla would drag the Kraken out of the water and onto land. This is where the Kraken is screwed. And we can even say that Godzilla ends up killing the Kraken and ends up eating it. At this point, Godzilla is the king of Skull Island. And what about our heroes? Let's say that during the fight, they were successful on escaping the island. But there were a few times where Godzilla noticed them and he was about to fire his atomic breath. But thanks to the Kraken fighting him, that caused him to get distracted. And thus our heroes were able to get out of Skull Island peacefully, in a much more different way than how they got out of Skull Island in the original timeline. Now, what about Godzilla 2014? Let's say that over time, Godzilla got bigger, bigger, and bigger. I would say he would probably be around the same size as Heisei Godzilla in his own timeline. Not the Heisei Godzilla in the monsterverse, but the Heisei Godzilla in his own universe. Let's say that -1 was able to grow to the size of Heisei Godzilla, where he's now 100 meters. And he probably left Skull Island because Skull Island was no longer enough to sort of support Godzilla, and so Godzilla left Skull Island, because it was no longer sort of a home that Godzilla wanted. This meant that Kong was now back as the ruler of Skull Island. So Kong is the ruler of Skull Island once again, now that Godzilla no longer seeks to live on Skull Island anymore. Now, when the events of 2014 do happen, let's say the Mamuto hatching out of his cocoon, Godzilla would probably want to go fight the Mamuto, because let's say that during his time on Skull Island, his time on Skull Island has taught him the natural balance in nature, and about, that certain kaiju will propose a threat to the natural order, like the Kraken and Skull Devil. So, -1 would kind of be more like Legendary Godzilla, kind of. He would still act very aggressively towards humans, and even go out of his way to attack them. But he will have some small form of being a protector. Now, let's say that the outcome of Godzilla battling the Mamuto will at first be similar to how Heisei Godzilla fought the Mamuto in What If Heisei Godzilla was in the Monsterverse. The Mamuto tries to use his EMP pulse to weaken Godzilla's atomic breath. But since -1 Godzilla is not a Titanus Gojira, it will not work on him. He's a radioactive dinosaur that evolved to become like this monstrosity. Now, Godzilla would probably destroy the Mamuto. In fact, I would say that Godzilla would actually end up killing the Mamuto. This meant that there was only one Mamuto left, the female Mamuto. With the female Mamuto being alive, and with her carrying her own eggs, somehow, I don't know how she was able to have any eggs when she broke out of her cocoon, but whatever, we'll just roll with it. The Mamuto would sense the death of the Mamuto and will get worried. Now, without the Mamuto, she would be in a lot of trouble when Godzilla comes to find her. Now, would the military result in trying to use a nuclear bomb to kill the monsters like how they tried to do in the original timeline? The answer is no. Oh, and the reason why they did that was because there was 3 monsters. Here, there's only 2. And there's another thing. Godzilla's atomic breath. We could say that Godzilla's atomic breath still works very similar to how it does in his own movie, where once he fires it, it acts like a nuclear bomb. But here, I would say that it's grown even more powerful and it lasts longer, and he can recharge a lot more quicker. Like, we could say that once when Godzilla fires his atomic breath would probably be more like similar to Heisei Godzilla when he fires his atomic breath. It would still have its explosive nuclear bomb power, but possibly even greater. Which meant that the military has to escort the kaiju somewhere away from civilization. Now, I would say at first they would try to get Godzilla and female Mamuto away from San Francisco, but eventually the 2 kaiju would end up meeting in San Francisco. Godzilla would start to fight the female Mamuto, and without the male Mamuto, she's actually screwed, because Godzilla's able to kill the female Mamuto a lot more earlier. The male Mamuto a lot more earlier. And without the male Mamuto to back her up, she's actually screwed. Godzilla would fire his atomic breath at the female Mamuto, causing a huge explosion. This would kill off literally everyone who was in San Francisco, including Madison Russell and her family. Even if they were managed to survive the explosion or the shockwave, they will still eventually end up dying. Due to a huge amount of radiation exposure. Godzilla will make his way towards the Mamuto nest and ends up destroying it by firing his atomic breath, making San Francisco completely uninhabitable for possibly a few years. And we can even say that Fort Brody and L. Brody died during the event. This left Sam Brody as an orphan. Now, what about the events of Godzilla Aftershock? Let's say that during the events of Godzilla Aftershock, Godzilla confronts Muto Prime and starts to battle with the Muto Prime. Godzilla fires atomic breath at Muto Prime, and it would actually hurt Muto Prime. Because not only is this atomic breath unlike anything that Muto Prime's been hit with before, but it has a very powerful and devastating explosion. Let's say that Godzilla was actually able to severely injure Muto Prime. Godzilla would chase Muto Prime around until he would eventually end up killing Muto Prime a lot more earlier than how Legendary Godzilla did in his own timeline, and unlike how Heisei Godzilla and Gojira did while they were in the monsterverse. Now, what about Monarch Legacy Monsters? Well, with San Francisco completely uninhabitable and completely decimated, like there's only 1 or 2 or even 3 buildings left standing. The rest of the city is just completely in shatters. There's like nothing left. It's gone. This meant that Kate, her brother, and May would not be able to go to Africa and find out that Kate's father is still alive. So, the events of Monarch Legacy Monsters will turn out very differently, with Godzilla fighting multiple different enemies, and yeah. And we can even say that our heroes never eventually end up going to that one place where Keiko, I think that's her name. Let me know in the comments below if I got her name right. They would never discover that she's actually still alive, and thus that changed the events of Monarch Legacy Monsters very drastically. Now, what about Godzilla King of the Monsters? We can say over the past 5 years, Godzilla has been destroying cities left and right, making some cities almost completely uninhabitable, just like how San Francisco is. And, well, with the Russell family gone, we can say that something entirely different happens. Like, for example, Mothra escapes her enclosure, or her imprisonment or whatever, and cocoons herself, because she senses a creature like Godzilla, but it's just attacking cities and destroying everything. And she is curious and wants to go find out what's going on. And we also got to remember, with the Russell family gone, there is no Orca. So that means that there's no way to control or calm down the kaiju, meaning that Monarch in this timeline has lost the ability to tell which kaiju were friendly and which ones were not.